live on everything. Usually Twitch takes the longest, as we know. But welcome to SASA's monthly book club. Today we are doing 1,000 Ships with Natalie Haynes, hosted by Lexie Henning. Just really quick, as usual, what is SASA? SASA stands for Save Ancient Studies Alliance. Our mission is to reverse the current downward trend in study of the ancient world, sorry guys, by engaging the public and bringing together students and scholars to share their passion for the study of the ancient world in order to inspire a vast new generations of students. Go to our website to learn more. Also, I'm not sure, I've realized in the last event that the cameras are over where I have our website listed. SaveAncientStudies.org, you guys. It's on every sheet, but then of course it's covered up, I think. But anyways, so if you search for Save Ancient Studies Alliance on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, you will find us. Oh, right here it says America still. Sorry guys, that's our old name. We are now Alliance to include everyone. But we post basically every day on our social media accounts, and we have these live events on Saturday where you can find the recordings of those on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook, including this one. For our live event protocol, of course, be respectful, ask thoughtful questions throughout the event, which hopefully Lexie will remind you throughout the event to send in your questions. Thank you. Be patient with our technology and those administering it. SASA live events are streamed on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. And as I mentioned, the recordings are saved there, so you can catch this later as well and have fun. And then, thank you for joining us. So basically, and again, here's our website now. Oh, and maybe I covered it up again. But I will turn it over to Lexie, our host, who is also from the Ozymandias Project, which she will explain in a second. And yes, thank you guys.
Thanks, Lauren. Hey guys, my name is Lexie Henning. As Lauren just mentioned, I am actually the host of the Ozymandias Project podcast. It is just your standard podcast talking about how to essentially bring the humanities to a modern audience and then basically improve the accessibility of the ancient world for everyone and all that good stuff. Yeah, I don't really want to spend too much time talking about me. So I'm just going to sort of briefly introduce our lovely guest, and then I'll let her say a blurb about herself. But obviously today we're all here because I'm going to be talking to the lovely Natalie Haynes, who is kind of just like jack of all trades, classicist, writer, on and off comedian. So she's done a bunch of things in her career, which I think are awesome. I believe I've seen her on BBC, The Review Show, as a panelist a few times. I studied abroad in Edinburgh, Scotland, and I've heard and seen, I believe, that she's performed at the Fringe Festival there in Edinburgh. And most people hopefully will have seen her previous books, Amber Fury, Children of Jocasta, and Oedipus Rex. And of course, now we are here to talk about 1,000 Ships. Natalie, if there's anything you'd like to add to that, go ahead.
No, I have nothing to add. That's it.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, I've got a radio show. That's the other thing. I have a radio show called Natalie Haynes Stands Up for the Classics, which goes out on BBC Radio 4, and we've done 6 series, and it's available to you guys, I think, on Audible. So yes, in the UK you can hear it on BBC Sounds, but I think in not the UK it's there on Audible for you. I'm not sure how many series are up there, but there are 6 in total. So
great. I'm glad I covered a lot of that. Okay, I was not sure. But anyway, yeah. So just to kind of start us off, would you mind telling us a little bit about the book itself, just in case there's anyone who has not read the book?
Yes, 1,000 Ships was my, was and is, I guess, my attempt to retell the story of the Trojan War only from the perspectives of the women whose lives are embroiled in it. And I didn't want to tell a story. I'd done, with the Children of Jocasta, I'd taken the story of the Theban conflict and retold it from 2 women's perspectives, those of Jocasta and her daughter Ismene, because I wanted to kind of rework a Greek tragedy. I'm mad for Greek tragedy, obviously. But with Ships, I wanted to retell an epic, and I wanted to see if you could tell an epic story from the perspectives of women, but that would mean loads of women. That would mean the women who are basically held under siege in Troy for a decade. It would mean the women who have been left behind in Greece waiting for their husbands and fathers and sons to come home. It would mean the goddesses who conspire with one another to worsen the war at some points, to start the war at other points, to help heroes get home, or indeed stop them from getting home at other points. So it has a huge cast of characters. It changes perspective often, and sometimes it's funny. The scenes with the goddesses, I think, are quite funny. Sometimes it is heartbreaking because, of course, it's a war, and they are. And the book begins with the muse of epic poetry, who is Calliope, who's really unimpressed at being asked by a poet to sing for him.
And why did you decide to write the book? Like, there are probably so many different periods and times and stories that kind of ignore the woman. So what was it about this?
Yeah, I've only
Trojan War
classics, so this was the only one. This is the only one I'm an expert in, to be honest with you. I'm not just going to randomly wander into 16th century history. I don't know anything about it. So yeah, no, that would be a big risk. I think the Trojan War, I mean, it's such a huge story, and I've been studying classics, well, Latin since I was 11, Greek since I was 14. So I started studying them extremely young. I was very lucky. And so the Trojan War has been part of my life for 2/3 of my life, I suppose. And when it came to that point where I was trying to think of what I sold Jocasta, this is a grimy financial answer to a question, but it is the true one. I sold Jocasta to a publisher who asked if I had a second book in mind. They wanted a 2-book deal. And I said, yeah, I've got this idea, because I'd sort of been walking home. I walk a lot, I mean a lot, more than even a normal enthusiastic walking person. And I thought how great it would be to be able to tell the Trojan War from all these different perspectives, to be able to, I'm convinced that if you have a story that's really solid, and I was pretty sure I'd proved it already by writing Jocasta, you can tell it from any angle and it will hold up, because it's such an intricate piece of work. And I knew that the war was like that. And so I was quite certain. I was walking home and I suddenly thought it would be so cool to tell the story of the war and start it with the horse, because that's the bit that everybody knows. Classicist, non-classicist, doesn't matter. Everybody knows about the Trojan horse. And I thought, how about if I started there, and then I could tell the consequences of that forwards, and I could tell the causation of that backwards. So these two different angles would emanate from this starting point. And so I wrote a page to the publishers when they said, have you got another book in mind? Which said basically, yeah, I'm going to tell the story of the Trojan War, and I'm going to start with the horse and the fall of the city, because that's the bit everybody knows. So I don't want to try and create suspense for that. That would be stupid. So what I'm going to do is start with that, and then I'm going to tell half the story backwards and half of it forwards. Oh, and it's going to change POV every chapter. Okay. And they, to their enormous credit, went, yes, that's fine. Here's some money. I was like, I cannot believe I've got away with this. So yeah, it didn't look like a very commercial prospect when I started it. And now, of course, it's turned out to be by far my most commercially successful book. And everyone thinks that I must have planned it this way. I always think they're going to sell really well. I'm always like, oh, okay. And so, yeah, no, I had absolutely no idea this book would resonate with readers in the way that it has, only insofar as I always wish that everything I write will do that.
Yeah, and I think it's awesome because so much of this war and what we have in popular culture, it's very much centered on the male perspective. It's from the idea of Achilles and the heroes, which is why we have things like the Brad Pitt Troy and the new Netflix series.
Of the Brad Pitt Troy. It's so boring. I'm not saying he's boring. He's quite good in it, but it's so boring. It goes on for about 14 days. I thought, oh, I'm sure the war itself didn't take longer than this, did it? The Iliad only covers 2 months. I could read it. I could read 24 books in Greek in the time it's taken Wolfgang Petersen to get to his... Sorry, it's very nice, is it? Anyway, there it is. My opinion on the film Troy is now irreversibly on the record. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, I mean, well, obviously we have everything in popular culture before the book was male-centric. I'm just kind of wondering, what was it about specifically the Trojan War? Have you always just loved the Trojan War? Have you always just loved Homer? Because I can think of several different wars within Greek history where I think you would have had some really interesting perspectives from women. If you take the Peloponnesian War, you probably could have written for Aspasia, what must she be thinking? Pericles is doing all these things. Yeah,
I guess I'd already done the Theban conflict, so it wasn't the first war that I came to. And there does seem to be something kind of neat about doing one and then the other, it vaguely seems to me. But yes, you're right, of course, I've loved Homer since I was literally a child. He was my set text at the age of 16, and then again at the age of 18 in the UK, when exams are taken. So yes, I mean, I'd been reading the Odyssey and the Iliad for such a long time. I think I had Odyssey 21 was my GCSE 16-year-old exam set text, and then Iliad 6-7, the bit where Hector goes back to Troy and speaks to Andromache, was my A-level set text. And so, you know, yes, these texts have been in my life for literally decades, and the war is so intricate. And I really am properly a Greek tragedy nut, and so I'd written a lot about Sophocles and Euripides, and a bit less about Aeschylus. And I thought I would really, really like to be able to take on the Trojan women, the Hecabe, all these Euripides stories that we're so used to seeing in isolation on the stage. You know, they could become part of a whole. And, you know, Aeschylus used to describe his plays as slices from the banquet of Homer. So it's like, well, why wouldn't you why when you get to the Clytemnestra chapter, wouldn't you basically just write the Agamemnon down? It's so good. And so, yeah, and I hadn't realized, in fact, until I came to the Clytemnestra chapter, that actually Aeschylus' Agamemnon has so many qualities which are basically those of like a horror movie. You know, when Cassandra gets there, she sees black furies dancing on the roof of the house. That's not me writing that in this. That's Aeschylus. You know, it's like, that's like out and out Japanese horror film. How is that not? It's just extraordinary. And so there were just so many moments where in order to try and find a way of sharing this story with a 21st century audience, I found myself kind of rediscovering elements that just seemed to have come straight from the 21st century. You know, you always have to be careful when you're engaging with the ancient world that you don't elide that distance between us and them, because they're such different cultures and, you know, different places and different times and all of those things. And yet at the same time, if you're going to try and find a way of opening out this story, I'm never ever going to suggest to anybody they should read my book instead of reading Euripides or Homer or Aeschylus, but I hope that it gives you another way into those texts of being able to say, look, there are women here, look, there's, you know, these elements here which are more familiar maybe to us than just jumping into the beginning of the Iliad and expecting everyone to kind of get the vibe straight away.
Yeah. We actually have our first audience question. Yay. It's from Katie Does Classics, and she's asking, how did you find the process of trying to create distinct voices for such a wide cast of women?
I adored it. There are times when you can see that I can't give someone up. So originally, I was going to do the perspective changes all the time with the causation timeline. I think, is that true? Yes, it is. I think because at every layer, so it's like the city's fallen. When could we have stopped it? The women say to themselves as they wait on the shore. That's the Trojan women storyline, essentially, which is the closest thing the book has to a present tense, although it's told in the immediate past. And then in order to get us back, it's like, well, Theano, who is, well, I'm not telling you who she is, and then, you know, before her Penthesilea, and then before her, and so on and so on. So that changed every single time. And the consequences timeline, I knew you'd have a bit more time to kind of meet these women on the Trojan side anyway. But I was absolutely certain when I set out to begin the book that I would do the same thing with the Odyssey that I was doing with the Iliad, and that all the women of the Odyssey would appear as narrators in the book. And then I wrote the first letter from Penelope, which of course is an idea I stole wholesale from Ovid. The first of his Heroides is a letter from Penelope to Ulysses. And I just went, that's the best idea anyone's ever had. Thanks, Ovid. Thanks very much. Took it, ran with it. Hid the locks, changed my name, moved countries, it's all been fine. And I wrote the first letter from Penelope to Odysseus, and I thought, there's absolutely no way I'm giving this voice up, absolutely no way at all. So in the end, the whole Odyssey is framed through these letters from Penelope, because I just couldn't give her up. But I mean, some of the narratives, the majority of the narratives are told in the third person, which makes it a little bit easier, because then, although the perspective changes, the register doesn't particularly change. Although the God's register is much more light-hearted than the human register, because obviously there are very many fewer consequences for them to ever face up to. So they just operate at a much more relaxed level, let's say. But the first person voices. In particular, I guess that's Penelope and Calliope. My mom, when she first read the manuscript, said, everybody's going to think you're Penelope and only I will know you're Cassandra. And I was like, okay. And Calliope was barely in it at the beginning. My publishers asked for more of her because they thought it would help people kind of find their way through the book. And so, yeah, they just occupy. I know it's such a writerly answer, isn't it, to say, well, they just sort of talk to you and then eventually you know what they sound like. But it is true. The book I'm writing at the moment, it's taken me ages and ages to find the first person voice. And I guarantee it, the majority of it, again, is written in the third. But the first person voice, I guarantee when people read it, when it's published in the UK, it'll probably be next year. I guess in the US, it'll probably be the following year. People will say, oh, well, obviously that voice would have taken no time at all because she sounds exactly like you. And it's like, they're all me. This is what you have to understand. I'm a novelist. They're all me. This is where they came from. My actual pores. This is where they came out of, my actual brain. And so that it's really, sometimes it's just really hard. It's taken me literally months to find this new first person voice, and no one will ever believe that, and it will still be true.
Oh, that's perfect. That leads right into our second question, which is from Claudia Cox, and she asks, do you have any other ideas for another book based on mythology?
A couple. Yeah, I have a non-fiction book on women in Greek myth called Pandora's Jar, which comes out with you guys in next spring. Is that right? Yes. So it came out in the UK last fall, but I'm a bit behind somehow. I'm not quite sure how it's happened, but these things do happen sometimes. So Pandora's Jar will be out with you, but that's non-fiction. And then the next novel is Medusa. And the novel after that will be Medea. So yes, those two are sold and announced. So yeah, I have to have ideas for them. Otherwise we're all in terrible peril and I'll lose my flat.
Oh, well, that sounds certainly very entertaining. I would totally read something.
Good.
By Medusa.
That's all I need. So I just need one. No, wait, I need slightly more than one sale. But let's consider you a starting point and see how it goes from there. Yeah, no, I'm about through Medusa at the moment, and she's going all right. She was very slow to start, but it goes that way sometimes. 2, come on, boom. It just does go that way sometimes because it's, we're locked down in the UK. We've been locked down since December, and we're going to be locked down for another, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks or something. So you'd think that then you would be like, oh, I've got all this time for writing, but actually, of course, what you've got a lot of time to do is stare into space and feel crippling anxiety, and that takes up loads and loads of time. And then you've only got 20 minutes left to write. So it's my schedule is packed. Crippling anxiety, 20 minutes of writing. It's exhausting.
Well, you are creating wonderful things that we are gobbling up, so
you know what the thing is, even if it's a nightmare, even if it feels like a trudge, when you read it back, it doesn't read like a trudge. And that's the main thing. It's that I'm offering this out unrequested, and therefore I apologize for the appallingness of offering advice no one's asked for. But here's the thing, as a writer, there are some days when it comes really easy and the words are beautiful and they'll move from that perfectly easy day of writing straight into the final draft. And there are some days when it comes really easily and they're worthless and they have to go. And there are some days when it's like pulling teeth the whole way through and those words feel like it. You can feel the effort in them and they have to go, or at least be massively improved. And there are other days when it feels like that, exactly the same, like trudging through something solid in order to try and get anywhere at all, like Sisyphus pushing his rock up a hill, and you get to the end of it and it reads like somebody wrote it in the easiest, happiest frame of mind. And so, there's no guarantee that the way you feel when you're writing it is in any way related to the way the writing is. And so sometimes you just have to, what I've basically done this year, you just haven't asked, I am sorry. I haven't got anyone else to talk to. We've been locked down for a really long time. What I've basically done this year is I always try and write 1,000 words a day, and I haven't very often managed that. But there's still 30,000 words. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, okay, well, every single day, basically I failed. And yet somehow here we are a third of the way through. I will take that. It's a really, it's been a hard one third of the way through to get, but I like this bit now. Once I'm part way through and I know what everyone sounds like and what they're doing and who's over there and who's not gonna, and my mom is already like, oh, I'm gonna cry, something terrible's gonna happen. It's Medusa, mom, loads of terrible things are gonna happen. I'm really sorry. She's like, can't you write a nice book?
Oh, goodness. Well, I enjoy hearing about the process because that actually segues perfectly into our next audience question from Luna. And she asks, what are the challenges involved in retelling such a well-known story versus writing a whole new one? And what are your favorite parts of that process?
Here's the thing. It's a well-known story to us, but it is not a well-known story. That is the thing. And it took me the longest time to work that out. And when I say the longest time, I mean, I was probably, I would say 60, maybe 70,000 words through the Children of Jocasta before I thought, and I'd spent the whole way through going, how am I going to make a suspense narrative? Because it should be, you know, Oedipus Tyrannus is the first great murder mystery. At the beginning of the play, we know someone's been murdered and we don't know who's done it. At the end of the play, we totally know who's done it. That guy over there, eyes streaming. So it's like, okay, I need to find a way of telling the story that everyone knows. And then I spend a lot of my time when I'm not at my desk in normal life, performing to audiences in schools, universities, book festivals, all over the place. I talk to students who do classics, but I also talk to students who don't, who do English, who do drama, who do history. And my extensive observed experience is that while we all think everyone knows this, everyone doesn't know this. And so I spent tens of thousands of words of Jocasta thinking, how will I fool people into reading this story that they already know, before accepting that A, they didn't already know it, and that B, I didn't already know it. And that I actually, the version of the story I was taking was closer to a lost Antigone of Euripides, of which I think there are only 50 lines surviving, much closer to that than to the Sophocles Antigone, because that's the version that I, in the end, decided to pursue. But actually, the real issue there was that people, I mean, I don't want to spoil it for you. So I'm not going to tell you, I'll move on to ships again. I mean, I think it's a question of ordering and structure as much as anything. So I think if you ask people the things that they definitely know about the Trojan War, this is what you get. Number one, Trojan horse. Number two, maybe Achilles' heel. I should tell you, if I ask this question in Greece or Cyprus or somewhere like that, Achilles comes up first every single time. He is vastly more famous there than any other person in the war. But if I ask the question in the English-speaking world, then I say, who's the most famous person that's attached to the Trojan War? And people say Helen of Troy. She's the only one that's got of Troy in her actual name. That's how much she's crucial to the war. She's not from Troy, otherwise it'd be a much shorter war. So, you know, she is integral to it. And I thought, well, she gets very little of a go in ships, relatively speaking. She doesn't get her own chapter because I felt her story had been told so extensively, and also because her story in the Odyssey is just really weird. And when I tried putting it into the text, it just threw the whole thing off balance. I was like, nope, that's going to have to go. Sorry, everyone. Which is a shame because she gets a really nice speech at one moment, but she doesn't get a chapter. That's okay, because Calliope, my muse, is jealous of her for being really pretty. So it all works out. Everyone's fine. But yeah, I think the way that I did it with ships was basically to say, okay, well, this is the thing you all know, is the horse, and that the city falls because these men inside the horse get inside the city. All right, we'll start with that. And so the thing that everyone knew was over by, you know, page 25 or something. And I felt like that would mean that I could keep telling this story forwards and backwards, and people would feel like they didn't know what was coming next, because I think lots of people don't know what's coming next unless you're absolutely immersed in this. There is no timeline. You know, we think rightly of the Iliad as the great Trojan War narrative. It doesn't contain the heel or the horse. You know, it's only 2 months in the 10th year of the war. The Golden Apple story, absolutely no sign of it in Homer. I don't think he even mentions it. I think there's a mention in, I can't remember if it's the end of the Iliad or the Odyssey Iliad, I think, where he talks about maybe Hera having enmity for the city of Troy because of a thing that has happened. But there's just, you know, this whole big story that we all know isn't actually in popular usage that much. So it wasn't anywhere near as difficult as you would think. And in fact, the opposite problem was more of an issue, because my editors are much more likely to come back and say, we're slightly worried that this bit assumes that people know things, and they won't. So in the first draft of ships, the end of the Briseis and Chryseis chapter is one of the things that was most difficult to do. But the whole of the Iliad is told in, I think I'm right to say, about 1.25 pages, because if you're telling the story from the perspectives of the women, almost nothing happens. Some guy goes off and gets killed, and then the other guy goes off and kills the guy who killed him. And that's it. That's basically the whole Iliad from the perspectives of the women stuck in the Greek camp. And the first draft, when I sent that in, my editor came back and said, I'm not sure people will notice he's died. And I was like, oh. All right. I didn't quite put another sentence going, he's dead, all right, and then an arrow, but I basically did do that. So yeah, so that chapter ends with Briseis refusing to cry for Achilles when he's dead, and then it jumps straight from her chapter. I think that was the change that I made in the end, to the chapter of Thetis's perspective, the mother of Achilles, of course, and she does cry for her son. So, you know, that was that was the way that I decided to do it. But generally, I always feel slightly awkward about classicists reading my book, because part of me wants to go, there is no suspense for you because you already know all of this. But it doesn't seem to work that way. I think even super eager classicists, and I mean, the book is full of Easter eggs for classicists. If you're a massive nerd, then boy, did I hide a bunch of things in this book for you. So yeah, because I'm a massive nerd, so it was always going to happen. So I hope it works on multiple levels. That's always my goal.
Yeah. And so I apologize in advance if I butcher anyone's name. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm trying my best.
Embrace butchering their names. I think that's something to aim for. It makes up for all those Greek names that other people butcher. Like,
right. So I'm going to do my best with this one, but this is a question from Aishwara Chandarvakar. And the question is, what are your thoughts on how intertextuality work in the retelling of myth and epics from the viewpoint of lesser known characters?
Well, I suppose the question then is, it depends what you mean by intertextuality. So I guess that's my, I guess I'm going to have to guess, unless you want to reply really quickly in live time. I can't see your chat, but maybe I can. No. Oh, what does my t-shirt say? It's Snoopy. Sorry, there you go. Snoopy being Joe Cool. I love Snoopy. He's the great American 20th century icon in my view. I don't understand why you're not. I don't understand why he's not on the flag, if I'm absolutely honest with you. What is wrong with you? He is just the greatest thing. What? No, it's no good. It's too difficult. I can't read and talk at the same time. So what was the question about intertextuality in retelling minor characters? Well, I suppose the advantage of writing from women's perspectives is that literally nobody bothered to do it for the longest time, apart from Euripides and Ovid, and, you know, to a slightly lesser extent Sophocles and Aeschylus. But generally it's a massive open goal for those of us who want to look at characters who have previously been considered marginal or liminal. It's like, yeah, it's half the world on the Lee-men, mate. I'm not sure the threshold's got that much space on it. Are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure we can come in if we want. And so it's a total joy. It's a total joy being able to look at these stories and reframe them from that perspective, because it's right there waiting for you. And being able to take these texts and play with them together is one of the great delights of doing it. So I didn't know when I started out with ships that the Troades, the Euripides play, Trojan Women, would become the spine of the book. As far as I was concerned, it was just these two spirals, one forwards, one backwards. And then suddenly it's like, oh no, it's got to be anchored to these women on the shore. And that will enable me to do, I mean, not that much really. It'll enable me to keep them together so they can tell the beginning of the causation timeline themselves. And then, you know, the revelation of Polydorus, so that the Hecabe timeline can play out. But they just needed to be there. They didn't really need to be there for very many structural reasons, but it became immediately clear once I'd written the first scene that I was going to have to keep coming back to them. Euripides and Ovid both they're like a constant drumbeat in my life. And so the interplay actually between those two writers is one of the, it is constant in my writing. I know that there are reasons to find Ovid problematic, and I both acknowledge and respect those reasons and the people who feel that way. But I love Ovid for the Heroides alone, quite aside from anything else, because who else would ever have thought to create this extraordinary set of women's voices? I mean, literally, it's just him. It's just, this poem is 2,000 years old. How did anyone, you know, tell me all the other male writers, tell me them now who are doing that. And you'd be incredibly hard pushed to find good examples. And so I think that these texts are in constant tension with one another, I hope. that there's a sense of the story being refracted through both text, so Homer, and then Homer as he's been reinterpreted by Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and then Homer and those tragedians as they've been reinterpreted by Ovid in the Metamorphoses or the Heroides, and then how have those texts, all those layers of text, been interpreted by translators into other languages like English later on. And so I hope that what it is like a window made up of these incredibly thin, like microscope slide thinnesses of just going, well, what happens if we look at this through this and this and this and this, and they're all a very slightly different shade, and it's like, well, what color is the final thing? And that's that. Ships is the first book, I think, where the material world, the material ancient world, has been a big inspiration to me. So you can, one of the many fun tasks for classicists is to identify things people are wearing from vase paintings and which museum I stole that from as you go along. And so there are some, I think there's one which says in the author's notes, so I won't spoil it for you because it's right there in the text, but Thetis gets some absolutely beautiful, well, I think, earrings for her wedding, which come straight out of the British Museum, which you can walk to from my front door. Obviously, they're currently closed. No, I'm enjoying it. No, honestly. And they're incredible with beautiful monkeys and snakes. Or anyway, they're great, huge, just huge things. And you can't imagine how human ears could have held them. It's like they must have gone to a goddess or a sea nymph, because nobody else, if you put them in your ears would be down to, no, they clearly went to a nymph. And so, yeah, I pinched loads of things from the museum and put them into the book. So I hope that is there too, as a play between things we can read and things we can see or not necessarily touch, but the material culture of the ancient world and the written tradition of the ancient world, I hope, are also in an intertextual relationship in this book. That was always my goal, and you can only try and fail, hey, but as well as you can.
Yeah, well, we have a great question here from Christian Casey. He says, I'm also an academic working on my own historical fantasy fiction. I believe intellectually in the value of the exercise, but I've struggled with the feelings that my book, that I've spent time writing stories that are foolish. Sorry, I'm trying to condense this. Did you ever experience this before? Anyone has responded positively to your work? If so, how did you deal with it?
Whatever is there a word minutely for like more often than hourly? If there isn't, I'm coining it now. Yeah, all the time, Christian, all the time. Here's the thing. I know that we're questioning the notion of imposter syndrome because sometimes it's the world that's wrong and not you, right? So if you feel like you're, in the wrong place in a room full of white men then maybe they should move over, and it's a structural issue, not your imposter syndrome that's at stake here. But with all that considered, I would nonetheless point out that I think everyone has imposter syndrome apart from the people who should. So here's the thing. The people who move with wild confidence through life, assuming they're excellent at everything, don't trust those people. Those people are sociopaths and they will break your heart. And also they're probably not very good at things. They're just extremely confident. So well done them. It must be delightful. I can't imagine what it's like to sleep through the night and not be filled with anxiety. But, I'm sure they've got other virtues. And some of them might be useful to me. I don't know what they are. But most people, and certainly most creative people, are riddled with anxiety and questions of their own competence. And that's, in a way, I think you need that proximity to the edge. I don't want you to be actually on the edge, because that is not a happy place to be. And sometimes writing too intensely for too long can take you too close to there. Ships pretty well broke me into pieces. And I recovered by writing Pandora. I had to recover by writing nonfiction. That's why I didn't write a novel afterwards, because I just literally physically couldn't do it again. I destroyed everything I cared about in the pursuit of writing Ships. And then ironically, of course, last year when the world stopped, it became incredibly successful and kept a roof over my head. She's like, great, good. I'm glad we don't have a conflicted relationship or anything, book. But everybody who's creating, I think, apart from people who are terrible at it, worries that they might not be good at it. And it is unbelievably difficult to just silence those voices and keep writing. And sometimes, I can't lie to you, those voices are right. Sometimes the words aren't good. Sometimes the book is the wrong book. Sometimes, you know, it's just not working for reasons that you'll work out later, but you can't do yet. And those voices are like, and you go, shut up, but they won't. And that's why. And other times it's just a sort of low grade, like not even self-destructive tendency, but like just a low grade, sort of mild persecution, you know, where just a bit of your brain is like, are you sure you want to do that? Are you absolutely sure? Really though? And it's useful to have that editorial voice, but sometimes it can be too loud and it kind of drowns out the rest of what you want to say. And I wish I had a better answer for you than saying, you just have to kind of muscle through it. And sometimes it's really destructive and it's really difficult, and other times it's okay. If it's getting too loud, go for a walk or a run or a swim or whatever you're allowed to do, and means that you can't. I can think about writing when I'm walking, but not when I'm running, because if I tried when I was running, I would fall over. I'm too clumsy. So if I'm stuck on a scene or something like that, so it's quite a valid bit of me in your brain, I'll go for a walk and that will help me fix it, and then I can come back and get back to work. But if my brain is just at that point of being like, nothing you do is good enough, watch Murder, She Wrote reruns, obviously I'm not an idiot, go for a run, and then you can't think about it because your brain is engaged in another thing, and it's a process that just doesn't get better the more you think about it. You know, running is the same whether you think about it really hard or not at all. That's it. You can invest all the brain power you have, it won't change how fast you can go, or you know, how quickly you can go up a hill. So I will always just go for a complete switch and then come back to it tomorrow. But if every day is like that, I do see that you wouldn't get a book. And if every day is like that, then you might have to put the book aside for a little while until you're in a more confident, I suppose, place. But sometimes it's just hard, and other times it's okay. And as I said earlier, there's no necessary correlation between the quality of the writing and how it feels to write. Sometimes it's just really hard, but it doesn't mean that the writing is bad.
We have another question here from Miriam Mitchell. She says, do you think Helen was wily and manipulative or mostly innocent? And then she adds the caveat that she knows that there's not just one answer, but would like your thoughts on it.
My version of Helen, at least the version of Helen who is in 1,000 Ships, is extremely clever. I consider wily to be a pejorative term in this context, other than when referring to a coyote, obviously. So I'll go with, yes, she's extremely clever. And is she manipulative? Yes, absolutely she is. Insofar as when you meet her in my version, it's that scene essentially from Troades where, I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. Even by Euripides standards, it's astonishing, where Hecate says to Menelaus, I'll praise you if you kill your wife. You know, she's been found guilty of causing the war in her absence, Helen. So she hasn't been there for this trial, and she's been sentenced to death. The Greeks have decided that she should die. And then Hecate says to Menelaus, I'll praise you if you kill your wife. And that's when Helen walks on stage. I mean, what a way for a character to enter, the most beautiful woman in the world. Boom, bang, here we go. And then we get that unbelievable agone between her and Hecate, where she just demolishes the arguments for why she started the war. There is no version of Helen that I have ever read it anywhere that I like as much as that scene in Euripides. She is so smart. You know, this could be a proper legal speech, and it's in verse, by the way, just in case you weren't already impressed by just the sheer dazzling rhetoric involved, the construction of arguments. Oh yeah, and poetry, thanks. And in the end, you know, the point she makes to Hecate, which include, you know, it's not my fault, who's the one who was given a perfectly good prophecy saying that Paris would destroy the city and didn't kill him as a baby. Now, obviously, we today might consider you didn't kill your child when they were a baby not to be a very strong argument. But infanticide, quite common in the ancient world, you know, quite a large percentage of children, about a third, don't make it to adulthood, not, I might add, because they were put to death. But the idea that children's lives are sacred in the way that they are now would definitely be an anachronistic reading, I think. Or at least an optimistic reading of the past, I guess. And so she makes this, you know, real demolition job of Hecate. And Hecate in the end is pretty much reduced to just saying, no, it isn't. And you know, it's not fair, and go away. You know, she hasn't really got and Hecate is no slouch when it comes to an argument, but she can't best the arguments that Helen has. So that version of her I adore. And the version of her that we see in the Euripides play Helen as well, where she's really fun and funny, and she and Menelaus, and he doesn't seem like an idiot for once. You know, normally Menelaus is like a plank, and you're like, was he great in bed? I can't even begin to see. Where does a smart woman like you get off with a guy like that? It's like, oh, really? Do you just ask him not to say anything? Well, I can't believe that. And then suddenly there's a version in Euripides where you're like, oh no, that works. Now the two of you are quite cute together, and that works quite well for me. So those two versions of her, I think, probably are the ones I like the most. But I didn't write a version as manipulative or as wily as Odyssey 4, for example, where Telemachus gets to Sparta and finds that Helen and Menelaus's married life after the war involves her basically slipping, date rape drugs into his drink every night so that he can't cry. I mean, it's just horrific. It's really unpleasant. And so I certainly didn't write that version. My version of her is clever and thoughtful. She is closer to maybe the version in Ovid's Heroides and that Euripides version. But yeah, I don't consider her guiltless in the subject of the war, but I certainly don't consider her guilty. I consider her to be one of a huge quantity of causes. And in my version anyway, she has no choice but to obey Aphrodite's demands that she goes with Paris, because the alternative would be madness and death.
I missed it before, but there's actually a follow-up also from Miriam, who also asked, have you ever encountered any sources that were sympathetic toward what we would now consider a powerful ancient woman?
All of Euripides, pretty much, no? I mean, I think his telling of Medea is absolutely extraordinary. It's incredibly sympathetic telling. I would argue the notion of powerful, sympathetic views of powerful women, both the Medea and the Hypsipyle letters in Heroides, obviously Sophocles' Antigone, Euripides' Phoenician women. My God, that opening monologue in the Phoenician women, where Jocasta talks about the pain of having lost Oedipus as a baby, and Merope in Corinth having been given this child, and she says, she nursed the child my labor pains produced. Let's remind ourselves, written by a man, performed by a man, to an audience very probably of just men. It's like, sorry, what? You would never have been you're a posh man. You're not going to be, holding your wife's hand going, come on, darling, breathe, when she gives birth. That's not really the impression that we get of birth happening in the ancient world. Men are usually kept at a reasonable distance, as far as I can remember. And yet, and again, that's we're used to stories of posh people having wet nurses and things like that. And yet there's this speech from Jocasta, and it's so physical, labor pain, not, oh, it was a bit of an awkward day, the actual physical bodily pain of giving birth. And then the actual physical response that Merope, who, remember, has not had a human child, has to this baby is to produce milk. I mean, it is a revolutionary, I say this all the time, it's a revolutionary text, but it is a revolutionary text. It's extraordinary that a man writing 2,500 years ago in this incredibly patriarchal, cloistered, class hierarchical society could even think of women in those terms, let alone write them like that, let alone portray them like that. The man's a genius. I'm done.
Great. We have a question from, I believe this is Rosalind Decker. She asks, how do you decide what parts of your writing you're basing on research and what you're making up yourself?
Generally, it depends when the material runs out, is the short answer. I would never pick my own imaginings of things visually over ones I can get off vase paintings or sculptures or anything else. I don't have a particularly visual brain. I never have had. So it's disappointing that I decided to become a novelist. Anyway, it's all fine. So, for example, the outfit worn by Themis, the goddess of divine order in this book, there are almost no images of Themis, only a couple, I think, on vase paintings. But one of the ones that there is, she hasn't gone with Snoopy, disappointingly. She's gone with a repeating pattern of deer. And they go one way and their antlers are up here like this. And then the antlers on the next line down, they go the other way. The antlers fit into the gap between the feet of the one above. It's so intricate and beautiful. And whenever I found these kinds of things or saw these kinds of things, I was like, yeah, I'm having that. And I just took them out wholesale. But generally, our ancient literary sources are so focused on the male experience that it became quite easy really to decide when to give in and pursue it and when not to. So I suppose a good example would be the Laodamia chapter. There are very, very few sources about Laodamia. She's got an Ovid letter, and it's lovely, but it's about 160, 170 lines, and I needed a whole chapter. So yes, the outline of her story I took from Ovid, but the voice of her, she is all mine. Their voices are always mine, I think, really.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. We have another question from Lycanrock Okami 97. Was there a female character that you particularly struggled to connect with in terms of her personality and or backstory?
No, I'm not sure there was really. I mean, I suppose it's fair to say that by preferring Penelope over the rest of the cast of the Odyssey, I kept myself away from doing that. So I didn't ever get to engage in the same way with Calypso or Circe. Or I mean, I had this idea. I was like, oh, it'd be so great. And I can do the Sirens chapter can be a song and that'll be really beautiful. And then I don't know, I didn't quite get in my mind what I was going to do with Scylla and Charybdis. It's like, I'm going to have a chapter from the point of view of a whirlpool. How's that going to go? But I mean, so yes, I suppose you could argue that none of them grabbed me enough. And so Penelope got preferred, but it didn't feel like that. Generally what happens is the characters just occupy the space they're going to occupy, and you know, it is what it is. I don't tend to feel much remorse, I think, for the ones that don't get much time in the sun. Just, you know, if the book came in really skinny, I would go back and give them more space, but generally they've been elbowed out of the way by other, you know, noisier women, so it doesn't seem like a terrible answer.
I love this question. So it came in from Claudia Cox. She says, my mom, a big fan of yours, would like to ask, which were your favorite characters to write from the perspective of?
Oh, Cassandra. I really liked writing Cassandra. She was the most difficult thing about writing Cassandra is it's really difficult to write visions without using the language of theatre or film, like scenes and things like that. Or that the scene, you know, plays again, or that you know, there's no theatre at the point where Cassandra, and I was like, oh. So that was by far the hardest bit, but she was just a joy to write. I loved writing her. You know, she's always derided as mad, and of course she's the opposite of mad. She's just unbelievably isolated, in a way which is kind of devastating, and it made it really, it felt like a real seance talking to Cassandra, you know, a real communion with the dead. And Penelope was just fun and easy, you know, because every one of her letters is a chunk of the Odyssey, which I obviously wasn't going to be able to tell the whole thing. And also, you know, there's some of it which doesn't particularly require retelling from her perspective, because it's like, well, how important is it to her rather than how important is it in the story of Odysseus. For Penelope, it's all about how, you know, how much closer to home are you, how much further away are you, how much danger are you in, and so she was always just an easy joy to write. Her chapters were so much fun. Getting to do Circe and the Cyclops was just a delight to do. The trip to the underworld where she's just getting crosser and crosser, and again, you know, that was just a lovely moment, because I've read that scene a bunch of times, but I'd never really noticed, I guess. You don't, maybe, until you come to imagine it from her perspective, that when he sees his mother, who, you know, he just finds out has died by virtue of seeing her in the underworld, he asks, you know, how's my father, how's my kingdom, how's my son? It's like the 9th person he asks about is his wife. And only when I came to actually read it, I was like, man, you'd be annoyed. Oh, you would be cross at this point. So yeah, I mean, these bits just wrote themselves sometimes. It's like the Homer isn't funny, and nor should it be, and I wouldn't read it that way. But when you come to look at it the other way around, it's like, oh sir, you've got this terribly wrong. And so, you know, it just changes the way you feel about it, I guess. So Penelope, Cassandra, that's my answer.
Oh, those are great. Those are great. I love those answers. Let's see. We have another question from Katie Does Classics. As a fellow Cambridge Classics student, how did you get to where you are now?
Really slowly and circuitously, in very much the manner that Odysseus gets home from the Trojan War, but it's taken me slightly longer, and I've blinded marginally fewer one-eyed giants, I would say. Yeah, I started doing stand-up when I was at Cambridge. I was part of the Footlights, their comedy society. And I graduated and then became a stand-up comedian. It took me about 2 years to go from working in a shop to being able to make a living as a comedian. I believe it takes longer now because, well, at the moment, I imagine it takes forever. But anyway, I did that for about a decade, just over a decade. And then I started, while I was doing that, in the sort of second half of that time, I began writing for the Times, the London Times. And I had a weekly column there for about 5 years. And then I moved to writing for another paper for another few years. And while I was doing that column for the Times, I wrote a piece about Roman emperors, and it just generated this huge quantity of readers' letters. So off the back of that, I wrote a book called The Ancient Guide to Modern Life, which was about how the modern world makes more sense if you refract through the prism of the ancient one. But I really wanted to be writing novels. But at the time I was writing, which was 2009, I guess, the credit crunch was happening. And you're all really young, so you probably don't remember this. But once upon a time, all the banks were very bad, and then everyone ran out of money. And you were about 4 or something. And to me, it feels like it happened about 20 minutes ago. And you're like, no, it isn't 20 minutes ago. But it was just really difficult to be a first-time novelist at that point, whereas I had a reputation, a very small one, as a newspaper columnist, and so a non-fiction book was just easier to sell. And then off the back of that, I wrote Amber, but I wrote Amber without a contract. So I had to write the whole 80,000 words without ever knowing if it would get published or I would get paid. So that was quite I wouldn't necessarily recommend, if you can avoid doing that, do, because if you think you get a lot of anxiety about writing when you've got a contract, imagine how much anxiety you get when you might never get one. It's stressful. And Amber came out in 2014, and then Jocasta in 17, Ships in 19, although a little later for you guys, and Pandora last year. So it's just been a question of, I always, when I go and speak in schools and they ask how they can have a career in writing or broadcasting or whatever, I always say the trick, unfortunately, is that you have to just bang your head against the wall until the wall breaks, and the whole time you have to pretend it doesn't hurt.
Ouch. Yeah, I don't envy you, but hey, I'm very happy you're sitting here where you are today, because
now it doesn't hurt. And the words
now it doesn't hurt, and we have wonderful books to read.
Yeah.
We have a great question here from Martha, who asks, do you have any favorite ancient women who you think are misunderstood by modern audiences, maybe by those who don't know the complexities of their story?
Yeah, most of them, I think. Aspasia is always referred to as, the whatever she is, courtesan of Pericles. Oh, shut up. What does that even mean? And so I think it undersells the word Hetaira, it undersells her education. She's clearly this sort of, integral part of his social circle, and reducing her in the sort of slightly euphemistic, slightly girls language of whatever, the 1800s or something, does nobody any favors whatsoever. So Phryne, who is obviously one of the most interesting art collectors and wits of the ancient world, and yet you would be hard pushed to find a reasonably modern source who doesn't call her a prostitute and nothing but that. So we have these in the Deipno Sophistae, the collection of witty things said at dinner. We have examples of her being funny. It's like she is a funny actual person from the past, and all you care about is that she was probably naked because somebody was painting or sculpting. So yes, virtually any woman from the ancient world. I have argued on stage, and I would do it again tomorrow, that Agrippina the Younger is the greatest Roman emperor they never had. So she would have been a vastly better emperor than Nero. But then maybe Britain wouldn't have revolted, and we wouldn't have had Boudica as our great feminist icon of the 1st century. So who knows?
We have another great question here from, and I apologize if I butcher this, I think it's Arik Malak. I'm so sorry. I'm someone interested in the academic study of the Hebrew Bible. How do you think that the common understanding of Greek myths as story versus concrete reality has allowed the study of it to flourish versus Bible studies?
I don't know anything about Bible studies, I'm afraid. The person you're looking for is Professor Francesca Stavrokopoulou, who is both Greek and an expert on Bible and what used to be called the crypto Bible, I think, the lost books of the Bible. So she is the person you need to ask. I'm afraid, as a godless soul, I cannot help you with your Bible studies.
But we wish you luck.
We do, of course. But it is really difficult, because to me, gods are all equally interesting as literary things, but I simply don't believe in one as a phenomenon, I suppose. But you never want to, offend people to whom it's a deeply held belief. So it is really difficult. But yes, I am fascinated by the parallels between, gods being born and how that works. How does it work when it's the New Testament and it's Jesus? How does it work when it's Athene springing from the head of Zeus? How does it work when it's Dionysus in the Bacchae? But I do see that for many people, those things aren't comparable, but they are to me, because that's what I guess it means to be a godless soul.
Let's see, we have another question here from Luna, who asks, especially for a subject as dark and complex as war, how do you manage to work out the balance between humor and tragic poignancy in your writing? Well, it's difficult, and sometimes you have to kind of wait until the end to see if it fits. The trick is generally not to have too many similar in tone chapters next to each other. So every now and then there are moments where you go, is that too much of a tonal lurch, when it goes from this appalling tragedy to a funny scene straight afterwards? And sometimes you kind of feel like, oh, I'm not sure. And then other times you're like, oh no, that really works as a contrast. And if it doesn't work, then you need something that's tonally like a stepping stone between them. So you can go from, really funny to really serious, or the other way around, with something slightly less intense between the two. But of course, that's what's happening in, I think, in tragedy. When you have a chorus after this very intense scene between two people, super intense agone, or something really dramatic and stressful, and then you get the chorus singing a lovely ode to something, you're like, wait, what is happening here? And sometimes I think we need that breathing time. We just need to have a little recovery before we can go back into the thing. And so, yeah, generally you try and go something devastating, something pretty, something funny, something serious and important, and so on, and keep the structure just holding them all in place. Yeah. Let's see, we have another question here. Again, I apologize. Aishwara Chandarvakar. She asks, do you think the narrative would have changed if you'd placed the stories of these women in a contemporary setting? Yes, it definitely would have. And I'd done that with Amber, my first book, which retells in a way in modern day Edinburgh, in fact, your one-time city. It takes the story of the Oresteia and works it in a modern setting. And I think probably Professor Edith Hall noticed that it was the Oresteia, and otherwise, I'm not sure a single other reader did. I mean, it is incredibly unnoticed, that the structure of it, and it's even written in 5 acts. I couldn't make it clearer that it's about somebody who teaches Greek tragedy. I mean, it's just short of coming around and actually hitting you around the side of the head with a copy. I didn't feel like I could do any more, and people just didn't register it. So it's that thing where it's like you assume everybody will notice, and people don't necessarily. So yeah, it would have been a massively different book, for absolutely sure. Yeah. There's a really, really fun question. I know we're running short on time, but I want to ask it anyway because it's a great question and I just love this one. It has come in from Miriam Mitchell, and she asks, who would be your top 5 ancient dinner party guests? Oh, that's a difficult one, isn't it? So we're going to have to subvert the rules, because we wouldn't be allowed at dinner parties, I guess. And we'd have to have some men there. And then they would bring flute girls, and it'd be like, oh, I hate the noise. Could you just shh. So yeah, no, I think probably, I don't know, so the ones I liked writing about the most, like Cassandra, probably not, because I think she'd be quite hard to, you feel like you had to look after her, and that would be, and Penthesilea is really sad, so that would be really difficult as well. And Hecate might just take a brooch pin to you, so that's risky. Clytemnestra definitely would take an axe to you, so that is risky. So I think lovely Creusa from the beginning of the book, the wife of Aeneas, as described by Virgil in Aeneid 2, I think she seems really like she has her head screwed on. She's practical and she makes good decisions in a crisis from the decisions which are available to her. So she definitely gets to come. Jocasta for sure from
Theban cycle gets to come. And actually Ismene I would have as well, her younger daughter, unless you're reading the Jean Anouilh version, in which case her older daughter. But not Antigone, because she's just too theatrical for my taste. I'm like, oh, pipe down. I would find it, and I wouldn't have the Sphinx either, because I don't like a quiz. So that would annoy me. How many have we got? 3. I mean, I love Medea. I would be a little bit worried she would poison me, but she probably wouldn't. Do you know what? Let's compromise and have Hypsipyle instead, because that way she definitely wouldn't poison me. She probably would give amazing gossip about Jason, which I'm very much here for, which means I've got time for what? Oh, Ariadne. I would have Ariadne as my other one. I think she'd be practical. I'm quite a keen knitter. She's got thread to hand. I feel like we would have some kind of yarn discussions. So yeah, there you go. That's my set.
Great. Yeah, that's a really fun question. Yes, yeah. I was gonna add in, I would probably also want Ariadne, just because she seems very sensible, very reasonable.
She does seem sensible. Yeah, and sometimes that's the person you want at dinner.
Yes, and I knit as well, so it would have
there
been
you go.
perfect to we'd have just our knitting club.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Greek knitting club.
Greek knitting club. Make sure we have
Greek knitting club is talk about it as much as you want. No one cares. Wait, how dare you? Yeah, no, exactly.
Okay,
just have to have some good tea.
Club for sure, joining this knitting club. But as Lexie said, we are kind of coming to the end. Not that obviously I'll let you say a few last words, but I sent the link in our comments to SASA's event page. So go RSVP to our future events. Right now we only have a few on there, but we do have a few more planned that will be on soon, including another Archeo Gaming with Lexie. So Lexie is just doing all of our events lately. And also for me to come on and thank Natalie so much for coming on and doing this. I laughed out loud at least 10 different times during this. It was super great. I have to agree with many of your opinions on things that you were saying.
It just saves time. Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much for coming and doing this. It was super great. Hopefully
my pleasure.
Back on for your release of Pandora in America, as you said, next spring or something. But yes, let you guys close it out and everything. But I just had to thank you so much for coming and doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really going to say much more other than I tried as hard as I could to at least read off 1 or 2 of your questions. I'm sorry if you submitted a question and I didn't get to you, but I was trying my best to balance it with some new voices. And then once I cycled through, I could get more of your lovely questions. And I saw there were a few left we did not get to. I apologize. But obviously Natalie has a lot to say and we really want to hear everything she has to say. So I tried my best.
I think you did a great job. So thank you guys very much. Natalie, your answers were amazing. We did get through most of the questions. And to be honest, shout out to a bunch of former and current SASA interns that were in these comments. So love you guys. You're amazing. Hopefully we'll see all this stuff on your pages and stuff. So I think off of that, we will see you guys next time. I think it's not next week, but maybe the week after. We have an Archeo Gaming session for Civilizations 5. So RSVP to that, like I said, at the link that I shared. And thank you all for coming. So have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks.